For our final project, I wanted to do a fun, really simple project that relied both on using values and using really simple gestural mark-making strokes to make something that will hopefully bring a smile to your face. So we're painting some really quick poppies just coming out of a sketchbook, and I think that you're going to love this one. For this final project, we're going to paint these really simple poppies, setting a timer for 5 minutes. And the idea here, remember, is not to make these perfect, but to use this photo as inspiration for a really fun, playful 5 minute sketch. So I'm going to start with basic shapes. I'm using a size 10 brush with loaded up with some bright red paint. And I'm just going to kind of look at the shapes that I see and try to mimic them as much as possible. Now, with flowers, especially when you're painting florals, especially when you're sketching florals, remember dry space is a huge commodity because it's what really allows you to give organic shapes like these petals definition, right? By allowing dry space to provide details that helps to give these blobs essentially some kind of form. So when you're trying to intentionally incorporate dry space into painting flowers based on organic shapes that you're looking at from a reference photo, one thing that can be helpful is knowing that you don't have to put the dry space exactly where it, quote, is supposed to go on the page. You can just know to yourself, okay, self, I'm going to kind of look around, see if I can identify some specific shapes of these flowers, and then also know to myself, I need some kind of dry space somewhere in order to give shape and form to these flowers. And it doesn't have to necessarily correlate exactly with what you're looking at. It can correlate loosely, or you can just kind of put dry space, just practice putting dry space where you think it's supposed, where you think it might go or where it might look good. Either way, the idea is to get paint to paper, right? So as we're painting these flowers, another thing to keep in mind along with the dry space is to identify shapes that you can see, right? And that means instead of looking at these flowers, these poppies as that's a poppy, try breaking it down into multiple shapes. So like the flower, the poppy that I just painted, right? I did that little bottom curvy part first, and then I kind of filled in the shapes around it. So if you can find kind of an anchor shape, right? A shape that is pretty easy to identify and pretty easy to paint, and then kind of fill in the gaps, like fill in the shapes around it, leave the dry space around that anchor shape. It's a lot easier to approach with stuff like this. Now, are these poppies arranged in exactly the same way that they are on the page? No, absolutely not. Like they're a little bit looser, right? They're kind of in the same space, but not really. Um, some of those flowers are overlapping, but I decided not to have them overlapping in mine. And that's a really important thing to remember with sketching is that none of this has to be exact. None of this has to be, okay, I'm going to prove to myself that I know how to paint this. I'm going to prove to myself. It's not about proving anything. It's about painting, right? It's about giving yourself these 5 minutes to quite imperfectly put shapes on a piece of paper. So we've used mark making, right? We've used shapes and dry space to kind of add movement and add some detail. And now, one benefit of painting that first layer of the poppies, like painting all of the poppies all at once, as opposed to painting one poppy at a time, right? Is that it gives this wet paint that we use to paint the poppies a little bit of time to dry. So parts of the poppies at this point are going to be wet and parts of them are going to be somewhat dry. So that gives us room to add more pigmented, darker value shapes on top of this first layer of the poppy to add even more kind of depth and detail, right? This is where we're moving on from using shapes and mark making to incorporating more value to add depth to these flowers. So I'm going to take some highly pigmented of that same color that I'm using, this highly pigmented red color, and I'm just gonna kind of outline some of the petals, look to see where it's dark on the flowers. It's not exact. I'm not even really like paying much attention exactly to where all the petals are. I'm just knowing, okay, I'm going to use some of these outlines to add depth and value to these flowers. And even if they're not exactly where they're supposed to go, it's going to make a difference. Then I'm going to splatter some paint because it's one of my favorite ways to finish off a sketch, and we're done. Thanks so much for painting this simple project with me, and I hope that you had so much fun.